evening. Right now, Metro Police are desperately searching for the person or people responsible for killing a man and a woman.
I got a male down in the middle of the street.
Breaking news now, a triple shooting leaves 2 dead.
Never expect for somebody to tell you your loved one was murdered.
This Labor Day will mark 42 years that have haunted the St. Cloud family.
30 years. 30 years this family has waited for answers.
A couple months go by, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you really start to struggle with the idea that the case might not get solved and that somebody might get away with murder.
It's very unfortunate that we have any cold cases at all, and certainly unfortunate that we have as many as we do. And that's why Ryan's work and the work of Project Cold Case is so important.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on our Project Cold Case Facebook Live. You'll recognize the face beside me, Katie Jeffries, joining us again this week.
Hello.
Thank you, Katie. It's been about a month, I guess.
Yeah, since our last case that we did.
Since our last case. So we all of these stories that you've done over the last 2 years plus, it's an opportunity for us to go back and bring them back into the light. If we have an update, we can talk about that as well and kind of fill in the people that follow Project Cold Case with the fact that we don't ever forget or give up. We just keep, we're going to keep showing these things until there's
keep putting them back out in the spotlight as much as you can.
Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about Debra O'Quinn. She was 18 years old. I think this was an early one, I think, with you, but it was when Jeff came on. Right.
You could see the technical quality got much better because then photographer Jeff Renfro, he got involved in it too, and he's such a fantastic photographer and editor.
He does amazing work.
He takes the stories to another level. So that's why I feel like this was kind of the start of where Unsolved is now, where it's a much more developed series.
Yeah, it kind of started as a typical news segment, a shorter version of an unsolved case. That we see, everywhere you look, anytime you turn on the TV. But now Unsolved has evolved into this,
its own like brand almost.
Yeah, there's a lot of followers. The bar has been raised. Jeff Renfro has to go back out there every series,
make each one good,
make each one a little bit better, and keep the interest, which is great. With Debra O'Quinn, we're gonna just a brief background on her. 18 years old, she disappears from her apartment on the south side of Jacksonville off Barnes Road in 1979.
Right, May 7th.
Yeah.
And her dad Walter, they'd been car shopping that day. So they'd spent the day together, kind of going around, looking at vehicles. And he dropped her off at her apartment. He watched her walk into the door, open the door, say, everything's fine. Yep, and, he drove away. Like all dads do, they watch you go in and everything's fine. And that was the last time he ever saw her.
Horrible story. So she's reported missing the next morning. There's evidence in the apartment that something bad happened. Later that year, in December of '79, some guys find her remains while they're out in the woods over by Mount Pleasant Road, kind of Arlington, Fort Caroline area, and investigators were able to determine she was stabbed to death. It was foul play. It was a murder. Let's watch your segment from. Do you remember when this one aired?
Oh man, I want to
February,
say maybe 2 years ago.
February, 2018, I believe. So
a year ago.
Yeah, let's watch.
Walter O'Quinn had spent the day car shopping with his daughter, Debra. He dropped her off to her South Side apartment, watched her walk inside, turn on the lights, and waved to him that everything was fine. He drove away and didn't know that was the last time he would ever see his daughter alive. Her disappearance gripped the newspaper headlines. What happened to 18-year-old Debra Lynn O'Quinn? On the microfilm at the Jacksonville Public Library, in the harsh black and white, there emerges article after article retelling a brutal story. Sergeant Dan Jansen with the Cold Case Unit at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office says the morning after Walter dropped off Debra, her roommate came home.
And when she walks into the apartment, this is around 9 a.m. in the morning, she sees her brother asleep. When I say her brother, I'm referring to the roommate's brother, asleep on the couch. And she awakens him and says, "Hey, where's Debra?" And he said, well, she's not here. I haven't seen her.
But Sergeant Jansen says what was even more disturbing, there was a lot of blood around the apartment.
On her bed, they're in the bathroom, there's some smears on the wall, there's some blood on the carpet. So of course she gets really inquisitive with her brother, and he basically discounts it and said he thought maybe there was an accident or something happened in the apartment.
Sergeant Jansen has asked us not to name Debra's roommate or her brother due to the reopened investigation. When Debra didn't show up for work that morning, she was reported missing and the search began. Detectives knew by the amount of blood something far worse than an accident had occurred. And then came a break. They found a witness, a woman who lived across the courtyard who thought she'd heard a woman scream in the night.
Got up, looked out the window, she saw a lot of activity in Debra's apartment. She said all the lights were on, and she said there was a male that was walking throughout the apartment. She sees him actually leave the apartment and go down to a pickup truck. He was carrying something. She said he was carrying it like a tire, but it wasn't round like a tire.
Detectives believe it was Debra's body, but the witness, unsure of what she saw, didn't call police. Jansen says officers confiscated a knife from the roommate's brother's car.
It was tested microscopically, and there was evidence of bone being on the serrated edge of this knife. However, they could not say there was not enough of the evidence there to 100% identify it as a human or belonging to Debra.
He says that though detectives at the time were suspicious of the brother's story, they found another piece of evidence, a palm print in Debra's room that didn't match the roommate's brother or anyone in their investigation so far.
Did that occur at the time of the murder, that palm print, or was it from a previous visit, or we don't know.
Then in December of 1979, Debra's body was finally found, heavily decomposed in the woods off Mount Pleasant Road, and it confirmed detectives' suspicions. She had been stabbed to death. A few years later came a big twist. Serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to Debra's killing. He was well known for multiple killings in the South and had spent time in Jacksonville, but was also known to exaggerate.
He was notoriously known for many, many murders, or many that he admitted to. Some of them that he tried to admit to, he wasn't involved in, and this is one of those type cases. Detectives
determined Lucas's confession was a lie. The case grew cold as the years, then decades passed. Walter died in 1996 without an answer about who killed his daughter. But detectives say this case isn't over. They still have evidence and blood kept from Debra's apartment, all things they can now run through DNA testing.
I'm hoping that the person involved in this has thought that they're very comfortable with what they've done and gotten away with it, that they may have spoken to somebody or mentioned it or talked about it. And if they have, by all means, contact us at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office or our partners at Crime Stoppers.
And hopefully bring justice to whomever viciously ended Debra's life that stormy night in 1979. In Jacksonville, Katie Jeffries with photographer Jeff Renfro for First Coast News.
All right, so that was the Unsolved segment, which talked about Dad dropping her off.
Kind of walked you through the pieces of the investigation, the fact that they found a lot of blood in the apartment. They just knew something terrible had happened.
The roommate's brother is home. The roommate comes home.
Finds her brother there.
asleep, and there's blood. And he kind of, according to Sergeant Jansen, blows it off.
Says he thought there'd been an accident. Maybe the girls had gone somewhere.
Not care. There was blood all over. Law enforcement, however, later says the amount of blood should have been a sign that something more than an accident
on
happened.
The walls, I think in one of the articles too that we read, drag marks on the carpet. That was on the walls, was on the carpet, it was on her house coat. So it wasn't just like you cut your finger. Like this was a significant amount of blood.
This was pretty major. And then they declined to give his name or the roommate's name. I guess obviously because he's not been cleared, but not officially publicly a suspect.
Because it's still an open investigation.
Investigation. But there was a knife found in his car that had bone
fragments on the egg
fragments that could not be identified
as either human or animal.
So if they're not human or animal, then you can't determine whether they're Debra
Right.
O'Quinn's or, you know.
And it is a hunting knife, so I mean, you know, if you found bone fragments on maybe, you know, a kitchen knife, it's something
Right,
different.
it
But
would be
this is a
something
hunting
different.
knife,
Yeah,
so
yeah. In 1979, you know, where you know, it wasn't enough. Let's put it that way. And then on top of that, there was a palm print.
right, that didn't match anyone
Didn't
in their
match him,
investigation.
the roommate's brother, or anybody else. That as far as I know, has never been identified.
And the hard
matched
part
anybody.
with that is they don't know. I mean, that palm print could have been from a couple days before. It could have been from someone
Could
else.
have been from
You don't know.
any moment in time before. I mean, it could have been anybody that stopped in that room. You know, you would think that if it was, you know, dad or family member or boyfriend or something like that,
That
they
would
would
have been
have
tested out.
eliminated them. Yeah. So, but you know, who knows? AC guy, plumber.
Right.
You know.
But it's enough that, you know, it's nothing that's conclusive enough to be able to lead to an arrest.
Right. Right. You would hope to identify that and figure out, okay, that's the plumber that was there the weekend
Yeah, we can
before,
move
and
that
we
out.
can move, eliminate him. A witness comes forward, but doesn't call police that night. The night she hears a woman scream.
And sees something being dragged out to a car. And we thought a lot about this. And, you know, you have to put yourself back in 1979. Whereas I feel like we would call police today. I mean, we might even take video of it on our cell phones.
Right, right.
In 1979, I feel like there was more of an attitude of you kind of keep to yourself unless you're sure.
Yeah.
So this person, they told police on the canvas that they heard the scream around 1:15 or 2:15 in the
Right.
morning. And then they saw someone carrying what they thought was a tire, probably Debra's body.
Debra's body,
But they didn't
yeah.
call police. They didn't say anything until, you know, hours later when the canvas happened.
Right, and obviously they couldn't see who it was. They couldn't identify a person, and again, they couldn't identify exactly what was going on.
Right.
So, that witness erred on the side of, you know,
Well, I
you
don't
obviously
know.
hope that
Yeah.
your neighbor's not being murdered and dragged out to a car. But she was able to give some information that gave a timeline, and it gave an indication, again, pointing towards foul play.
Right.
Debra O'Quinn didn't just walk out and go visit somebody at the beach. And, you know.
if you kind of walk through the timeline, so she was dropped off that evening. I think somewhere in the article it said around like 9 o'clock. Around 1:15 to 2:15 is when this neighbor hears the scream. The roommate's brother said he got there at 3 a.m. and she wasn't there. Roommate comes home at 7 to 9 a.m.
Yeah,
So that gives
yeah.
you that window between probably like 9 to 10 p.m. until maybe 1 or 2 a.m. that something in there occurred.
Something in there happened, and then, you know, I think they say a pickup truck that was what the person was loading
Yeah, because
in.
they had the back that
Yeah.
came down.
Yeah, and then, I mean, I think that law enforcement is pretty confident that that was whoever killed Debra O'Quinn loading her body into the pickup truck. I got on, you know, Google Maps today and kind of looked from Barnes Road, depending on exactly where that apartment complex was, to Mount Pleasant, where her remains were found, is between 10 and 15 miles, depending on where it was. So they didn't, you know, they didn't drive right down the street.
Right.
You know, they took her, you know, kind of to another part of town and dumped the remains.
And it was an isolated area back then,
Yeah.
whereas it's not the Arlington, obviously, we know today. It was like a lot of woods, trees.
It was a heavily wooded area, in an area that still, you know, definitely has houses and neighborhoods in it now, but it still has a lot of woods and stuff. So, you know, December '79 is what we're talking about when somebody stumbles upon the remains,
Right.
Calls law enforcement. They come out, they find. I think according to some articles, they find some hair.
Yeah, they can confirm that
they
it's
can
her
confirm that
and
it's her.
confirm she was stabbed, which they
Right.
figured because there was so much blood in the
Yeah,
apartment.
and you know, one of the things when you find when human remains are found, a lot of times it's hard to determine the cause of death unless there is a projectile, you know,
A bullet or something,
yeah,
yeah.
bullet or damaged skull. If it's strangulation or something like that, it can be a lot harder to determine. And even stabs, you know, the stab wounds have to be impacting bone for
Right.
them to be able to confirm that that's how the person was stabbed. So, so obviously there was damage to the remains that they were able to confirm that, which went along with their theory in the blood. and obviously piqued their interest with the knife in the roommate's brother's car, even though it couldn't be tied.
Not definitively.
Not definitively. So, and then I guess in the 80s.
Yeah, the Henry Lee Lucas.
Henry Lee Lucas throws a wrench in everything and it confesses.
And you have to remember, this case had been very public. So it had been on the news, television news, it had been in the papers. So this was a case that a lot of people knew about in the area. So of course that could have played a role into him coming forward, because he was someone who was trying to always up his kill count, so to speak, to make himself sound even bigger and better.
And he did have connections to Otis O'Toole, and who had come through Jacksonville. There are a number of murders in Jacksonville that they suspect and that he admitted, but none of them from Jacksonville were ever prosecuted. He was never charged with any of the murders he took credit for in Jacksonville, or that he was even suspected of in Jacksonville. And when you ask Sergeant Dan Jansen straight out, he tended to think that he was just taking credit for this. Yeah. That he had a confession, but he was just trying to add to his body count, so to speak.
Yeah, he said some of his details didn't ring true with what they knew the details of the crime, so they pretty much deemed it a false confession.
Yeah, and they had no physical evidence that linked him to the crime either. So confessions are a weird thing, and we know from interviews back in the 80s that Debra's dad, Walter, he took that confession and he believed it. Yeah. And he kind of considered her case solved from that point on.
Which is understandable when you go for years without an answer.
You want to know, you want somebody to be mad at, and you want to have answers, and there was an answer provided. He, latched onto it. From my understanding and what we were able to find out, law enforcement looked heavily at that. In fact, I think we have some articles, don't we, that we found in some old newspaper clippings where, like, this was the roadmap of a serial killer, and Debra O'Quinn is up there. If you can see Jacksonville,
they even have it on there.
Next to, they have her image on there, and Clint, did you read through it? Was this specifically to Henry Lee Lucas, or was this just this was a trail of victims that they thought all matched the same MO? Victims tied to interstates. So I think it got legs, you know, and there was a time when, attaching a victim to a serial killer, one, it cleared a case. Two, it kind of got some recognition, got some FaceTime for detectives. Not that was always what they were looking for, but I think in 1979, it was an easy thing to say for a lot of people that the serial killer that had ties to this area could have been, connected to this. And obviously, Walter O'Quinn took some solace in knowing or thinking he knew who did that.
But not everybody did it, of course, because the case was never officially closed. So that's why it's one of the ones that we're still revisiting, and cold case detectives at JSO are still looking into.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if there was physical evidence that tied him, you and I both know that the sheriff's office would.
They would have already linked it, yeah.
They would link it, and they would, move on. But they have not been able to do that. So, from directly from the sergeant's mouth, he didn't believe that Henry Lee Lucas was responsible for Debra's murder. If they had evidence that proved otherwise, they would,
it would just
go down that road.
It would be quite a stretch to believe that he was in her apartment somehow hiding, had gotten into her apartment, and yet all these other things, had happened in the same night.
Right. And I think the key to this, I think what law enforcement has obviously always felt like the key is this roommate's brother. I mean, even if he's not responsible, I'm sure they feel like,
maybe
how
he
did
knows
you
more.
not? How did you not see, hear,
realize with all this blood something
terrible had happened, and call police? And we weren't there, so we can't say what he was thinking or not thinking. Maybe he stumbled in, intoxicated, just passed out on the couch and didn't see it. But I think the hope is obviously when you have somebody that close to a major crime scene that they will have information, or maybe one day remember something and come forward. So Unfortunately, Debra O'Quinn's mother and father have both passed away. We have contacted Debra's sister. We've communicated back and forth with her on a number of occasions. She has preferred to remain kind of in the background and not so much in the spotlight and not do interviews. So we always respect that. But the kind of an interesting part of the Debra O'Quinn case is that she was a very popular very beloved young woman here in Jacksonville. She went to Sandalwood High School. She had graduated from high school the year before in 1978. And we have been contacted by so many of Debra's friends and people that knew her from back then that have wanted to get involved, have wanted to, I'm sure they would go on camera, but they're not really connected to other than they went to school with her and they knew her. And some of them were really good friends and some of them were just classmates that knew her in passing. But they have really kept her memory alive. I know at their 40-year high school reunion, they reached out and asked if there was any update that they could give. They've shared your stories, your unsolved segments, and our posts regularly on their Sandalwood alumni page. I mean, it's a weird coincidence, but Freddie Farah, that case, 43-year-old case, his son Bobby Farah went to Sandalwood. One of our other survivors, family of Nancy Jo Canode from St. Johns County, they went to Sandalwood, and all of them, have these connections. And so, like, when you go back to that Sandalwood alumni post and start reading through,
you see all these interesting connections.
There's these families that have, are connected. Even if they weren't connected through Sandalwood, they've lost somebody. There's 3 that were unsolved murders for years and years and years. Obviously, the Farah one ended up, being solved, but the Canode one has not ever been solved officially, and then obviously the Debra O'Quinn one. But it's really cool to see, here 40 years later that people that were not relatives of Debra O'Quinn still
very
think
much
about
holding
her,
on her memory.
Hold on to her memory. They want answers. They hope that to one day see justice for her. And are impacted by that.
Because you think about it, when you're 18 years old. And you lose a friend this tragically, and for a while they didn't know what happened to her.
Right,
she just disappeared, and there was this horrible scene. So there was a long time where people were looking for her, and they couldn't find her.
6 months, she was just gone.
Yeah, and then they finally find her remains and find out that she was murdered. I mean, that shakes you to your core. So I can understand why even 40 years later they want to know who would do this to her.
Yeah, and it was interesting again reading through some of those comments. Like there were people that had, I heard it was Henry Lee Lucas. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so they were, they had kind of like, oh, that's it. And they had moved on. And then when your Unsolved segment aired, they were like, wait a minute, we thought
it was him.
We thought this was solved and that it was Henry Lee Lucas. And, so there was back and forth conversation and, people raising awareness for these cases and understanding that while Henry Lee Lucas confessed, he was not ever,
he was not always the most truthful person.
Yeah, and this murder was never cleared and attributed to him officially. Right. So there still are questions out there that we would like to have answered, the family would like to have answered, these classmates and friends would like to have answered, and hopefully, we can do that. Yeah, show that one, Clint. Show that picture of her headstone there. There was I can't read it on the screen now, but there was. Yeah, there's something about her life, beautiful memory, and then the silent grief in there, and you can see that she was, a few months away from turning 19. She was still just 18 years old, and
yeah, it's hard. It's always hard when we cover any of these cases where people are murdered. It's always tragic, but especially when someone's so young.
Show those.
It's just always so sad. Like when we covered the young girls who went missing and were murdered in 74. It's just so sad to think they were so young and something so terrible happened. But popular young girl, I think she was working at a law firm, maybe as like a paralegal type or a secretary. I'm pretty sure I remember that because it was the boss that when she didn't show up to work the next day, I think either called her family or notified someone that she wasn't there, and that's kind of when they called police because when she still didn't show up to work the next morning.
I don't know where the roommate was that night. One thing I read said she had come to pick Debra O'Quinn up for work or something like that.
Yeah, I think it said she got there around between 7 and 9 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah. So, if you have information on this case, please reach out to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, 630-0500, area code 904. And then also, to remain anonymous and be eligible for, as we found out, we had Wiley Hodges on, Executive Director of Crime Stoppers last week. And he said it on record here, if you call in a tip that leads to an arrest and a murder, that's an automatic $3,000. So we always say up to $3,000.
But in a murder,
$3,000.
But in a
murder is $3,000. So if you have information on this case, 1-866-845
tips
8477. 8477. And that's a $3,000 reward if it leads to an arrest. So we've always kind of thought that was the case, but we put Wiley on the spot last week and said,
get that answer out of him.
Yeah, I said, so if somebody calls in with information on a bicycle theft, you're not getting $3,000, but you will get a reward.
Understandable.
He said. But if you call in on a burglary, robbery, carjacking, you're going to get a reward, and then the more violent the crime,
the more the reward.
The more the reward. Sense. So you start talking about rapes and murders and stuff like that. You're talking the big payouts. So this would be a $3,000 reward. He talked about the gun bounty program, which adds $1,000 to that if a gun was used in the crime and that is recovered. Obviously, that wasn't the case here. This was a stabbing. So, but yeah, really good information last week. If you want more information on Crime Stoppers, go back and watch last week's Facebook Live. Wiley did a great job of explaining how they handle anonymity, reward payouts, how quickly they pay out, like basically never more than a month from the arrest. So if your tip comes in and leads to an arrest,
within like a month, you can get
within
that money.
A month, the board meets every month and they get a printout of what tips led to arrest, and they go, bicycle theft, $50 or whatever the reward is, I don't know, and then murder, $3,000, and within a month of the arrest, you'll have your money. So,
all right.
So no excuses if you have information to not call and use Crime Stoppers.
And especially this one, I mean, it's been cold for so long. People who might have had close relationships back then, or maybe somebody in the last 3 decades has said something to someone. I feel like sometimes time can make people feel comfortable in their crime, and they'll say something or just hint at something. Even if it's small, police want to know.
You always wonder. We had this conversation with a family yesterday that came in, and they talked about somebody that had an alcohol dependency issue and how they always wondered if she was connected to this case that they were talking about. And you hope that maybe somewhere along the way somebody does have too much to drink.
And maybe
they say something. And maybe they say something to somebody. And at the time, it was chalked up as they were just drunk, whatever, intoxicated. But now maybe somebody be willing to come forward in those situations. So, to all of Debra's friends and family, we're still fighting for her too. She was. Obviously, you did the segment back in February, I think it was 2018, but then you did the hour-long segment.
Right, back in March?
Yeah, just a few months ago, and that was, she was one of those
cases in that case.
As well. So we're going to continue to share this stuff until hopefully an arrest is made or a suspect is identified. Sometimes they're not alive anymore, but
at least closure.
They can clear that case.
Closure.
Yeah, that would be good. So anything else you wanted to add, Katie?
I think that's it. Just if you know anything, please come forward. Her family would be grateful. Her friends would be grateful, and we can add some closure.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks for joining us again this week,
Happy
Katie.
to do it.
We'll get together again in another month, and we'll pick another case. So we'll try to get that one the answers that the family needs. If you can, share this Facebook Live, like it. We got to get as many people to see it as possible, hoping that one of them out there will have the information law enforcement needs. With that being said, next week we'll be back with an announcement on our scholarship with DJ7 that we are giving out this year. So we'll be announcing that next week on our Facebook Live. We'll be showing our remembrances. Yeah, it won't be live. It'll be recorded because I'll be in Phoenix. But it'll be the Facebook Live.
It'll be the video.
Yeah, so we'll be showing the remembrances here in just a second that are all the cases that we have in our system from this week until next week's show. So, Katie, thanks again. First Coast News, Unsolved. We got to start doing some more of those soon.
Yes, and we will.
And we'll keep everybody in the loop on when that next round will come out. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot.